The Honorable the President.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as a supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country, Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Protect us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator Nigel De Freitas, Senator Dr. Daneshwar Mahabir, and to Senator David Small, who are all out of the country. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from His Excellency the President Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTTSC. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago by His Excellency Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTTSC, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Mr. Ndale Young, whereas Senator Nigel De Freitas is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Mr. Ndale Young, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 20th of June 2017 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator Nigel De Freitas, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 20th day of June 2017. To Pastor Clive Dottin, whereas Senator Daneshwar Mahabir is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Pastor Clive Dottin, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 20th of June 2017 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator Daneshwar Mahabir, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 20th day of June 2017. To Mr. John Heath, whereas Senator David Small is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, John Heath, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 20th of June 2017 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator David Small. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 20th day of June 2017. Honorable Senators are required to take the oath.
I, Clive Dottin, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do affirm by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, John Heath, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I swear I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter. I, Ndale Young, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do solemnly affirm that I will hereby, through faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities of the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Papers.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper with the names of the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Housing and Urban Development, and also in my name. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the first report of the Public Accounts Committee first session 2015-2016 11th Parliament on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial years 2014 and 2015 with specific reference to the Auditor General's department. The annual audited financial statements of Point Lisas Industrial Port Development Corporation Limited for the financial year ended December 31st, 2016. The response of the Auditor General's Department to the fourth report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, second session, 2016-2017, 11th Parliament, on the examination of the audited accounts, balance sheet, and other financial statements of the Community-Based Environmental Protection and Enhancement Program for the financial year 2009 to 2014. The annual audited financial statement of Exim Bank for the financial year ended December 31st, 2016. The Trinidad and Tobago Housing Development Corporation vesting amendment of the first schedule order 2017. The Trinidad and Tobago Housing Development Corporation vesting amendment to the first schedule number 2 order 2017. The Trinidad and Tobago Housing Development Corporation vesting amendment to the first schedule number 3 order 2017. And finally, the Trinidad and Tobago Gas Master Plan final report.
Reports from committees.
Senator Crease.
Madam President, I have the honor to present the following report as listed on the order paper in my name. The second report of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure, second session 2016 to 2017, 11th Parliament, on an inquiry into the allocation and utilization of state lands for food production.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Madam President, I have the honor to present the following report as listed on the supplemental order paper in my name. The report of the Special Select Committee on the Senate appointed to consider and report on a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Offences Against a Person Act Chapter 1108 and the Criminal Procedure Act Chapter 1202 and for related matters. Thank you.
Urgent questions.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honourable Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, can the Minister state what action is being taken to bring relief to persons adversely affected by Tropical Storm Brett?
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the government is taking an all-government approach to dealing with the fallout of Tropical Storm Brett last night, which, thankfully to the Lord, we were spared its full wrath. Amen. We operate at 3 levels. At the OPDM level, where we deal with disaster management issues. At the infrastructure level, where the Ministry of Works and Transport, through the clearing of major watercourses and the clearing of roads where there were felled trees, and the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government as the first respondent in the disaster management situation. But with regards to the way the question is phrased, to bring relief to persons adversely affected by Tropical Storm Brett, there are a series of social services programs that the government has initiated over time. It starts with emergency grants for building that is coming through the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, which is a maximum of $15,000 for people so qualified under the disaster management issue. Also from the Ministry of Social Development, there are a series of grants which, when disaster strikes, people so affected can apply, and if they're so qualified, they would be granted various sums. The more important one of these includes minor house repairs for disaster that has struck the various households, like if your roof has been blown off or if you were flood hit, and that reaches a maximum of $20,000. All those who are affected by the flood can easily access this facility through the required application. Also, there is a household appliances grant which I think it's $7,000, where if your appliances have been damaged, stove, fridge, what have you, you can also access that grant. There's also school books and school uniform grants, which if your children's books and their uniform has been water damaged or what have you, if they're lost, all that could be easily accessed. There are a series of social services programs.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Could the Honourable Minister indicate to us whether there has been any preliminary estimates on the number of persons or citizens who have been affected or adversely affected by this tropical storm thus far?
Minister.
Well, there are no preliminary estimates to date, but under the disaster management plan, the regional corporations are the first respondents. So that data would be collated through the 14 regional corporations. They are still in the process of assessing the extent of damage and the reports, and hopefully within the next 48 or so hours, we should be in a better position to so indicate.
Can the Minister inform the Senate whether any lives were lost during Tropical Storm Brett, and if so, what kind of assistance the government would be prepared to render to the families?
Minister.
Well, based on my knowledge today, no life has been lost. If you have information, I will be willing to accept it and be so briefed, but as I prepared this statement, I wasn't aware of any deaths.
Senator Ma.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honourable Minister of Health, in light of the technical problems affecting the computerized tomography CT machines at the San Fernando General Hospital, how is the ministry addressing the delays being experienced by patients?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in order to understand the situation, one must go back, Madam President, one must go back to 2010. This machine arrived in Trinidad at taxpayers' expense in May 2010. It lay in its original packaging for 2 years until April 2012.
You want a piece of money to open it?
It was never installed, never used for 2 years. Installation then started in April 2012. During the installation phase, serious errors were made by the last board of SWRHA, and there was significant condensation on the machine.
Wow.
That happened in 2011. Due to that significant condensation in 2011, the warranty was voided. The machine was then commissioned and handed over to SWRHA under the chairmanship of the current Member of Parliament for Faizabat, Dr. Lakram Bodo, in April 2013, without a warranty and already defective. The machine, since its commissioning in April 2013, has been problematic because of its less than optimal storage for 2 years and the total negligence in its installation where there was condensation. There are 2 machines at San Fernando. One is fully operational, and patients are utilizing that machine, and we are using that machine on a 24-hour basis. Cancer patients, outpatients are being treated during the day, and inpatients during the night. Those are the facts.
Senator Ma.
Madam President, given that there are some 300 patients being affected by the breakdown of this CT machine, could the Honourable Minister indicate whether his government is prepared to utilize the state-of-the-art scanners lying idle at the Coover Children's Hospital to bring relief to those 300 patients?
Minister of Health.
President, relief has already been brought because we are using the other CT machine on a 24-hour basis, and no patient is being disadvantaged. Madam President, I may also state, when we had the shutdown of the Port of Spain CT scanner, coincidentally with the South scanner, do you know what the reason was? Under the last administration, the Port of Spain scanner lay in its box for 2 years. They did not install it for 2 years. It is only when I came into office and asked why is a CT scanner left in a container at Port of Spain for 2 years. I rushed the installation because the last board did not see it fit to put into their scope of works a UPS for that machine. This board, under this administration, had to spend $500,000 to purchase a UPS because of negligence, which left another CT scanner laid up for 2 years. So you had a CT scanner laid up for 2 years in Port of Spain and 3 years in San Fernando. So therefore, the machines would deteriorate. And we are on this side accepting full responsibility for solving the problems. Thank you, Madam President.
In light of the fact that hundreds of cancer patient lives are now at risk under the watch of this honorable minister, could the honorable minister indicate, Madam President, when will he take action, urgent action, to have this CT scan machine that is currently down for the last 6 months urgently repaired?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that question. Senator Mark? Senator Ramdeen, my apologies.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, through you to the Honourable Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister. What steps are being taken by the Children's Authority to investigate the circumstances surrounding the death by hanging of a 14-year-old child who was in the custody of the Children's Authority?
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, this government is deeply saddened by the unfortunate death of a child by suicide at the Children's Authority Child Support Center on Saturday, June 17th. This government extends its deepest and sincerest condolences to his family. The Child Protection Unit of the Police Service is conducting the official investigation surrounding this death. The Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago has also launched its own investigation.
Minister, just a second. Honourable Senators, the time for urgent questions has expired. Will the honourable members allow the Minister to finish his answer? Yes. Continue, Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and to the members. The Child Protection Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is conducting the official investigation surrounding the death of this child. The Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago has also launched its own investigation to determine whether any of its protocols for the care and protection of children were compromised in any way. The Prime Minister and the Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister will receive official reports shortly.
Senator Mark.
Thank you. Question number 82.
You have no supplementary questions?
No, I think it's the gentleman.
Sorry. Apologize again. Senator Ramdeen, any supplementary questions?
Just wanted to ask, Madam President, am I allowed to ask because the time has expired?
Yes.
As you please.
Yeah.
To the Honourable Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, have any steps been taken by either the Children's Authority or any other authority to ensure that the other children who would be in this home at that time are given any counselling as a result of what has transpired there on Saturday night? Minister.
Madam President, I don't have the specific answers to that, but I would imagine that this is what has happened already.
Ramdeen?
To the Honourable Minister, I understand that this is one home of a number of homes where that is under the jurisdiction of the Children's Authority. Has anything been put in place in relation to the other homes where children are held or kept and protected
to ensure that they don't fall into the same position as this 14-year-old child?
Madam President, as I had answered a question a few weeks ago in the Senate, there are policies, procedures, and protocols in place by the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for the various children's homes, residences, etc., and those continue to be in place.
Notice.
Madam President, the government is pleased to announce that it will be answering all questions on notice, save and except the final question, question 99, to the Minister of National Security. In this case, we seek a deferral of 2 weeks.
Question 99 is deferred for 2 weeks. Senator Mark.
Question. Thank you, Madam President. Question number 82 to the Honorable Prime Minister.
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago will not be launching any investigation into this matter.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, could the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of the Office of the Prime Minister, I beg your pardon, could he proffer any rationale or reasons for that decision taken by the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has taken no decision, as I said very clearly in my answer, in response to a very specific question. It is the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago who have taken this decision, and they are a statutory authority.
Madam President, is the Honorable Minister indicating that in light of the protocols and mandates given to this very important authority, and in light of the fact that teenagers are involved in this exercise, that that authority has unilaterally decided not to launch an investigation in such a serious matter?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that question. Senator Stooge.
Through you, Madam President, has the authority given any reason why they have decided not to?
Minister.
Madam President, as I said before, in answer to the very specific question, the Children's Authority will not be launching an investigation. That was the answer prepared and provided for this question.
Senator Mark, next question.
Question number 90 to the Honorable Minister of Public Administration and Communications.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprises.
Thank you kindly, Madam President. Before I can state the measures put in place, Madam President, permit me, please, to remind this Honorable House of the Honorable Minister of Public Administration and Information in his response on June 8, 2017, in which he shared that in 2007, the Public Service Commission regulations were amended to include regulations to provide ministries and departments to issue notices of vacancies and also to set up selection boards to interview candidates by way of amendments to the regulations with the consent of the Honorable Prime Minister and not by way of delegation. Secondly, Madam President, I would like to cite the following regulations in order to lay a framework to respond to the question asked. Regulation 13.5 states, notwithstanding sub-regulation 4, a permanent secretary or head of department may, with the consent of the Public Service Commission and in consultation with the Director of Public Administration, by A, circular memorandum, and B, publication in the Gazette, give notice of vacancies which exist in offices specific to the particular ministry or department to which any eligible officer may apply. Regulation 13.6. An application to fill a vacancy as advertised pursuant to sub-regulation 5 shall be made directly to the permanent secretary or head of department. Regulation 13.7. The failure of an eligible officer to comply for a vacancy as advertised pursuant to sub-regulation 5 shall not prejudice the Commission's consideration of the claims by that officer. And Madam President, Regulation 16.3, where a permanent secretary or head of department has issued a notice of vacancy pursuant to Regulation 13.5, that permanent secretary or head of department shall, Madam President, appoint a selection board to assist in the selection of a candidate for appointment to the vacancy. And 16.4, the selection board appointed under sub-regulation 3 shall include the director or his representative and shall be constituted in accordance with guidelines issued by the Public Service Commission. Madam President, I will now provide the measures which will ensure transparency in keeping with the foregoing stated regulations as decided by the Public Service Commission. 1. The permanent secretary or head of department would be required to prepare and submit a report to the Director of Personnel Administration, popularly called DPA, for the information of the Public Service Commission within 1 week of completion of the screening process with detailed information. 2. A representative from Service Commission's department would be required to serve as a member of the selection board. And 3, the selection board report must be submitted to the DPA for consideration by the Commission. And 4thly, Madam President, representations received are to be submitted to the Public Service Commission. Finally, Madam President, I wish to remind this Honorable House that while the Public Service Commission has given consent to ministries and departments to advertise, shortlist, assess candidates within the guidelines and specification of the Public Service Commission, all appointments and promotions can only be made by the Public Service Commission. I thank you, Madam President.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, could the Honorable Minister indicate to this House what mechanisms are in place to ensure that when persons apply through advertisements, all of the applications would be considered, all personnel would be screened, and there would not be any room for favoritism or favoritism, Madam President. Could the Honorable Minister indicate what mechanism is there in place to ensure?
Thank you. Thank you kindly, Madam President. Madam President, this administration is an administration that will work very closely with the Public Service Commission in ensuring fair play and transparency. I wish to draw attention, Madam President, to Regulation 16.5, which talks about the selection board appointed under Sub-Regulation 3 shall follow the procedures outlined by the Public Service Commission in its document guidelines for the selection of candidates, which it would issue from time to time. So this is not any ad hocracy taking place, Madam President. This process follows a clearly stipulated guidelines as laid down by the Public Service Commission. And Madam President, Sub-Regulation 6 states, the report of a selection board appointed under Sub-Regulation 3 shall be submitted to the Public Service Commission for consideration, and the Commission may, in its discretion, summon for interview any of the candidates recommended by the selection board. And that selection board, Madam President, must have a representative of the Public Service Commission. And Madam President, the rest would be left up to the principles of fairness.
To the Honourable Minister, through you, Madam President, could the Honourable Minister indicate to this Honourable Senate when was the selection board appointed under Regulation 13 and Regulation 16?
Madam President, that is a completely new question, and I am quite sure through the Honourable Minister responsible, an answer can be provided subsequent to this session.
The Honourable Minister indicate to this House whether she has any knowledge of the numbers of persons comprising the selection board, and in the case of any of the ministries, energy and energy industries as an example, who would be the members of the panel outside of the one representative from the Public Service Commission / DPA?
Minister.
Madam President, that process is left up to the particular ministry. One thing that remains constant is that in all cases, a member of the selection board would sit. The permanent secretary within the specific ministry would determine the rest of the composition of the panel.
Mark?
Could the Honourable Minister indicate where, in instances, citizens feel that they have been unfairly dealt with by the particular ministry through the selection panel? Would those citizens be able to appeal directly to the Public Service Commission for justice, for fair play, and equity?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, all my years in the public service, I'm aware that once a public officer or any official within the public sector feels aggrieved over an appointment or promotion, that person always have the wherewithal to appeal to the Public Service Commission, place their case, and the Public Service Commission will consider it in terms of having the matter investigated to ensure that those persons were not treated unfairly.
Senator Mark.
The Honourable Minister indicated to us how often would the ministry be called upon to submit reports to the Public Service Commission on this whole recruitment process so that transparency and accountability can be assured or be ensured?
Minister.
Madam President, for each one of the positions of which the Public Service Commission would have delegated its authority to the line ministry, in each case, the permanent secretary must submit a report to the Public Service Commission. So in the event that the Public Service Commission may have given its approval for 4 or 5 positions to be filled by the ministry, in each case, a report will have to be submitted to the Public Service Commission. Pardon me? It depends on the positions that the Public Service Commission has approved and when the ministry is filling those positions.
Senator Mark, next question.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 91 to the Honourable Minister of Public Utilities.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the acquisition of Massey Communications Limited by TSTT is part of a well-thought-out plan to improve and develop this country's telecommunications sector. TSTT, as the country's foremost telecommunications provider, has always sought opportunities to advance and expand the sector. It is against this background that in 2016, TSTT presented its current 5-year strategic plan, which sought to achieve the following objectives: to expand the country's fiber access to 200,000 homes, to roll out the LTE high-speed wireless data network to key parts of the country, and a complete overhaul of its broadband network technology, and the introduction of a suite of first-world business operations support systems. This 5-year strategic plan, which sought to improve the telecommunications and broadcast services of Trinidad and Tobago, was presented to the Cabinet by TSTT and subsequently to the Minister of Finance. TSTT also sought the approval of the Minister of Finance to raise $1.9 billion to finance this strategic plan, which was approved by a letter of non-objection on October the 14th, 2016 by the said Minister of Finance. TSTT, through its acquisition of Massey Communications, has grasped a strategic opportunity to enhance its operational efficiency and improve its quality of service, in addition to expanding its infrastructure and widening its customer base. The decision of TSTT's management to acquire Massey Communications Limited was subject to a thorough technical, financial, legal, and operational examination by industry experts and consultants over an extended period of time. TSTT Board of Directors is confident that the acquisition of Massey Communications Limited is a sound business decision that will benefit not only TSTT and its shareholders, but its customers and the wider public. The details of the Massey Communications acquisition have been shared with this Parliament on numerous occasions in the recent past. Given consideration to the operational parameters within which TSTT functions, on Tuesday, May 2nd, 2017, the share purchase agreement to acquire 100% shares of Massey Communications Limited was signed for the sum of $255 million. The decision to acquire Massey Communications was based on tangible benefits to be gained, and actually gained. One, acquiring Massey's communication new state-of-the-art 900-kilometer broadband fiber network passing approximately 34,000 households and businesses, thereby reducing the need to spend approximately US $20 million in foreign exchange capital expenditure for this infrastructure. TSTT's ability to speed up the deployment of its fiber network by an additional 3,000 homes passed per month. Obtaining Massey Communications' service delivery technology and processes that allows the delivery of service to customers within 2 days of order. Accessing Massey Communications' sales team that have successfully commercialized in excess of 6,000 residential customers. Gaining Massey's 6,000 residential customer base and upsell its portfolio of voice and security to 100,000 Massey loyalty card holders and provide them with incentives to purchase communication services from TSTT. Significant reduction in acquisition costs, economies of scale when combined with TSTT's existing entertainment customers. Reducing TSTT's level of planned investment in automation by approximately US $20 million, and improvement in the efficiency and effectiveness of its customer service. Acquiring Massey Communications' robust enterprise business and its entire business support systems. Madam Speaker, as a well-established communication provider, TSTT was poised to undertake its own expansion that would have cost the company a considerable sum. By taking advantage of Massey Communications' investment in infrastructure, technology, and systems, the company has saved significant expenditure, inclusive of that which would otherwise have been utilized foreign currency. Altogether, Madam President, this was quite a successful enterprise, out of which only good has so far come, and out of which only good is expected to come. You couldn't get more details than this. Thank you very warmly, Madam President.
Senator Mark.
Yeah, Madam President, given the optimism displayed by my honorable friend, would he be so kind in terms of transparency to provide this Parliament with an undertaking to make available the following documents: the due diligence report, the shareholder agreement, and there are two other reports that I don't recall at this time that Madam President would have informed the decision of that company, TSTT, to arrive at its final decision. Would the Honorable Minister, in the interest of transparency and accountability, make these reports available to the Parliament?
Minister of Public Utilities.
Madam President, as I indicated in my reply, the transaction has not been fully consummated. A share purchase agreement was signed on the date I specified a while ago. In addition to that, I would have thought that my learned friend, the very experienced Senator Mark, would have easily understood that this is a competitive environment and that there are certain parameters, in addition to which TSTT signed off on a confidential arrangement with Massey pending the consummation of this, which is quite normal in the industry. So I find the question coming, the supplemental from my friend Mr. Mark, rather flabbergasting, and would ask him further to desist in the interest of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Well, I decline your offer. Madam President, through you, may I ask the honourable member, given the fact that he has indicated that thorough examination was executed by experts and consultants before this decision was arrived at, could the honourable minister provide us with the names of the experts and consultants which examined this particular transaction before decision was taken?
Minister of Public Utilities.
Madam President, I want to spare this Parliament the time to repeat that which I have said a while ago, and as such, all that I said in relation to the first supplemental is equally apposite and applicable to this second supplemental. Thank you.
Senator Richards.
Madam President, through you to the Honourable Minister. Minister, in this acquisition of Massey Communications, has the TSTT board indicated to the government, or has the TSTT board indicated if there are expected job losses usually associated with acquisitions in terms of redundancies of human resources, etc.?
Minister.
As far as I am aware, that matter has not been given, it has not arisen so far, it has not been contemplated so far, and therefore I could say no more on it. Except to say, of course, in the spirit of business, in matters such as these, all of these things are possibility, but since it was not contemplated, then it doesn't arise.
President, given the close relationship between this company, Massey, through its chairman, Mr. Robert Bermudez, and one of its directors, Mr. Richard Young, could the Honourable Minister indicate to us whether this company, Massey Communication, experienced tremendous losses in the last 2 years? And if this is so, could you explain to us what was the rationale for this decision?
Senator Mark, I won't allow those questions. Okay? Senator Richards.
Thank you, President, through you. Mr. Minister, in most acquisitions, market analyses, HR analyses, and strategic plans would usually project some sort of HR rationalization. Has this information been provided through the board of TSTT to the government in any way in terms of justifying this acquisition?
Minister.
The swift answer to that is no, but I would also add that the government is only one shareholder in that company. And under the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, there is a duty of care to be strictly observed in relation to all shareholders. Thank you.
You have no more. No more.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
I have a few more.
Next.
I have to reserve my time.
Senator Mark, next question.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. Madam President, thank you very much. Question number 92 to the Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The negotiations between Sandals Resorts, Inc. and the government-appointed negotiation team with respect to a possible Sandals and Beaches resort project in Tobago are continuing.
Madam President, we know that it is continuing, and that wasn't the purpose of the question. We wanted to get from the Honorable Minister of Tourism, could this Honorable Senate, in the interest of transparency, be informed of what is the status of those negotiations at this point in time, Madam President? What is the status?
Senator Mark, you'll have to ask another supplementary. That one, that has been
Madam
asked and
President,
answered, yes.
Madam President, we understand that there was a meeting held some time ago between the Prime Minister and a number of other officials from that organization called Sandals in Tobago. Could the Honorable Minister provide this Senate with information surrounding that meeting as well as the personnel involved in that meeting?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that supplementary. It is not all right. Senator Ramdeen?
And through you, to the Honourable Minister, having regard to the fact that the negotiations are ongoing and have been ongoing, can the Honourable Minister tell us how long he expects the negotiations to be ongoing for?
Minister.
Until conclusion.
Next. Yes, Senator Ramdeen?
Is there any estimate as to when these negotiations will be concluded?
Well, that was asked in the preceding question, so, yeah. Senator Mark, any more supplementary? Okay. Next question, Senator Amin.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam, question number 93 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank Senator Amin for the question. There has traditionally been, over the years, a shortage of pharmaceuticals, and Madam President, it's stated here in the question, medical paraphernalia. I interpret that to mean non-pharmaceuticals. Right, but that's not really paraphernalia. So there has traditionally been, over the years, a shortage of pharmaceuticals and non-pharmaceuticals in the public health sector. And the Ministry of Health has adopted the following measures to address this chronic and perennial problem. 1, development of prescribing protocols with the assistance of the Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association and the Pan American Health Organization. 2, the rationalization of the National Drug Formulary with the assistance of the Pan American Health Organization. 3, the piloting of an IT solution for needs analysis and the development of the supply chain management by UNFPA. And fourthly, greater use of the PAHO Strategic Fund. Those are the measures we intend to introduce from this year's procurement cycle.
Senator Amin.
Can the Minister indicate in the short term what measures have been taken to alleviate the shortage of simple things like antibiotics and anesthesia, which would prevent surgeries from being done and so on?
Thank you. Madam President, if one follows, as I do, the global shortage of drugs, you would see that there's a global shortage of certain antibiotics and certain anesthetic medications for a variety of reasons. What we have done in the short term is source alternate suppliers. So, for example, when I came into office, there was a shortage of morphine. What we did was source an alternate supplier. So we are now trying to spread the risk amongst more suppliers in the short term, and we have been doing that. But, Madam President, when one looks at the global shortage of pharmaceuticals, they always point to the following areas: oncology, antibiotics, anesthesia, chemotherapy. So we are at the mercy of the international drug supply chain. And let me just say, in 20 years from 1995 to now, the global pharmaceutical industry has consolidated itself from 60 global players to, you know how many now? 10. With that comes lack of competition, lack of R&D, and closure of certain markets. But we are pursuing this aggressively by looking for other suppliers of key pharmaceuticals.
Madam President, given that a number of the drugs that are not available in the hospitals and the public health facilities, but are available privately, can the minister indicate whether suggestions that there is somehow a pharmaceutical cartel, whether that is a matter that is receiving his attention?
Minister.
Any indication of a pharmaceutical cartel for the private sector is out of the remit of the Minister of Health. What I will tell you is that the private sector works with us. Whenever we have a shortage in the public sector, we draw down on their supplies meant for the private sector. Additionally, what we are doing is fast-tracking the approval of certain pharmaceuticals through a special license which can be granted by the Chief Medical Officer. So as we try to cast our net wider, we are adopting many strategies to source drugs for Trinidad and Tobago from a wider global market instead of our traditional suppliers. And one of the success areas was in the case of morphine. And let me just explain something else here. There's a drug called Modicate, which is used as an antipsychotic. I had to answer a question last year. And when one goes on to the website again, Modicate, flufenazine, there is a global shortage again, and it's your major antipsychotic drug to treat schizophrenia, a total global shortage, because you only have 2 major companies in the world producing this drug. And we are now looking for other non-traditional suppliers. I thank you, Madam President.
Senator Ramdeen.
Madam President, through you to the Honourable Minister. The Minister has indicated in answer to the question, Madam President, that these measures that have been outlined are going to be put in place from the next procurement cycle. What I wish to ask through you, Madam President, to the Honourable Minister is what has been put in place or what had been put in place for the last 20 months before the next procurement cycle to solve these problems?
Minister.
Thank you. As I indicated, in the case of morphine, we did that within 1 month of my coming into office. 1 month. So that people on palliative care for pain management got that relief. So we did a lot of things in the past 20 months, but the crux of the matter is solving the procurement. And for the first time, the procurement system is going to put the patient at the center of the procurement cycle and no other interest. One of the things we are banning from this procurement cycle after the tenders go out is banning the use of advocates who then come to the different committees. So you have an antibiotic committee, you have an oncology committee, you then have advocates in the past who used to come to get a drug that they have a horse in the race for. We are banning that from now on. Everything is going to be done objectively and without favor for any person, any advocate, any distributor. That is a major reason why this country has had a perennial problem with drugs and non-pharmaceuticals.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, I ask the Honourable Minister, when will the next procurement cycle commence?
Minister.
The procurement cycle has already begun. The notices from NIBDEC actually appeared in the newspapers, I think last week or week before. So that procurement cycle is underway now to purchase drugs for the 2018 financial year. Also, for the first time ever, we are now getting the Ministry of Finance to back NIBDEC with funding for the last quarter of this financial year so that tenders approved now, the orders can be placed before the end of this financial year. What used to happen before is that even though you agree to your tenders now, you had to wait for the reading of the budget, you had to wait for funds to be made available to the Ministry of Health and NIBDEC after the budget before you could place orders. So traditionally, orders will be placed by October, November, and December. We are now working with the Ministry of Finance, and we are getting backing to place orders for the first time in this country in the 4th quarter of this financial year so that the orders could be placed and drugs could start to come in from as early as November. In the past, the drugs would start to arrive in this country by January and February following year. We are cutting that out. Thank you.
Senator Amin.
Madam President, the system of procurement described by the minister involving NIPDEC had been the source of supply issues for many years over several governments. That system was changed under the previous government, and this government reverted to that system using NIPDEC. Yes. And the question, Madam President, to the minister is if that the minister could provide information as to when the government would start using the guidelines in the procurement legislation the guidelines and provided until the procurement legislation is fully implemented. I'm sure the minister understands what I'm asking because he's familiar with the issues with regards to procurement of pharmaceuticals.
Minister.
And it's, Madam President, it's my pleasure to respond. And Senator Amin is partially correct. The UNC administration did set up something called the National Health Services Company Limited to take over the functions of NIPDEC, but you never did it. The company was never operationalized. So NIPDEC, even under your administration, continued to be the drug procurement agency. The new procurement legislation gives us an opportunity to revisit all of these arrangements, and we are revisiting those arrangements to see if, in fact, NIPDEC is the proper agency to be procuring both pharmaceuticals and non-pharmaceuticals. But I want to reiterate the plan that the last administration had. The company was set up, a board of directors was set up, $8 million was allocated for administrative fees, but you never went the way of giving them the authority to procure. You still maintained NIPDEC. We have still maintained NIPDEC, even with its shortcomings, and with the new procurement legislation, I think we will take your advice, and we have already taken a board to relook at the whole procurement issue. I thank you very much.
Next question, Senator Samuel.
Madam President, question number 94 to the Honorable Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, thank you. Madam President, in August 2015, Cabinet granted approval for Transocean Offshore Deepwater Drilling Incorporated of Houston, Texas, United States of America, to stack 6 deepwater drill ships in the Gulf of Paria on behalf of the owners for a period of 5 years at an estimated cost of $80,000 US per ship per annum, approximately $220 US per ship per day. After the general election in 2015, the Ministry of Works and Transport renegotiated with Transocean Offshore Deepwater Drilling Incorporated to stack the 6 deepwater drill ships in the Gulf of Paria for a period of 3 years, in the first instance at a cost of $750 US per vessel per day, with the option for a 4th and 5th year at a cost of $1,000 per ship per day. In March 2016, an additional 3 drill ships were given permission to anchor in the Gulf of Paria. The Ministry of Works and Transport once again negotiated increased fees as follows: $1,000 per ship per day for 3 years, with the option to renew for a 4th and 5th year at a cost of $1,250 US per ship per day. To date, no funds have been collected. A decision has been taken for the development of a framework for the expansion of layups before further action is taken on this matter. The framework for this has been completed and is expected to be submitted to Cabinet soon. The initial renegotiation period for the 6 vessels is 3 years from October 2015, with an option for a 4th and 5th year. The period for the last 3 vessels is 3 years from March 2016, with the option for a 4th and 5th year. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Ramdeen.
President, through you to the Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, could you state why or what is the reason for the non-collection of the fees that were due from these vessels over this extended period of time?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam President, the government has to be very careful as to what we allow and what we don't allow in the Gulf of Paria. What this government is faced with is a lot of wrecks that people would come in and they're willing to pay upfront $250, and then these wrecks remain here and we have to pay millions of dollars to remove them. We are faced with that situation right now. So this government have taken a decision to have a proper policy in place before we finalize on the collection of any foreign company here. Right now we have about 30 wrecks outside that we have to spend millions of dollars to remove. What we don't want to have in Trinidad and Tobago is a graveyard for ships. Thank you.
Senator Ramdeen.
Thank you very much, Minister. Through you, Madam President, could the Honourable Minister could the Honourable Minister inform the Senate how much has been outstanding to date with respect to these entire transactions that the government has to collect?
Minister.
Thank you. Madam President, I don't have the exact figure with me. However, I would like to communicate that we are in contact with the owners of the vessels, and they are willing to pay all the outstanding money. We are expecting to have the contract and the framework signed in the shortest possible time. Thank you.
Senator Ma.
Madam President, could the Honourable Minister indicate, given the fact that we do not want the Gulf to become a graveyard for ships that are unwanted, buried there, could the Honourable Minister indicate whether the government has taken a definitive policy to discontinue ships from coming into the Gulf and offering us $250 US, $1,000 US, to allow those ships to be buried there? Has a policy been determined and therefore a halt brought to this arrangement?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you. Madam President, as I said, the government is looking at a policy framework. And in that policy framework, we will tell you the age of the ship that will come here, the type of ship that will come here, and where we'll actually park the ships out into the ocean. What we don't want is that people just coming in here, like what happened before, drop anchor anywhere in the Gulf. And if I may go further to say, Madam President, the policy we want to put in place is that you don't have to know the minister to decide how much money you're paying, which seems to be what had happened in
To the Honourable Minister, you mentioned that policy is being put in place. Can you give us an idea as to when this policy will be in place, or when it will be completed?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you. Madam President, I can assure this House that the policy have been drafted and it will be taken to the Cabinet in the shortest possible time. Thank you.
Senator Ramdeen.
To the Honourable Minister, Madam President, could the Honourable Minister tell us what steps have been taken by the government to clean up those vessels that have been lying there in the Gulf for so many years without the government getting any income from them, and as the Minister has described, turning the Gulf into a virtual shipping graveyard?
Senator Ramdeen, I won't allow that question. Senator Richards, question number 98. Honourable Senators, Senator Richards has deferred question number 97 to the next sitting, and now he will pose question number 98.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that in light of what the country has faced in the last 24 hours. Question number 98 to the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the Ministry of Works and Transport Drainage Division has the mandate to develop and maintain main water courses and drains throughout the country, and to identify critical blockages at major water courses to be cleared and desilted. However, the role of the municipal corporation is very important because they are responsible for maintaining smaller drains which will impact on the main water courses. The corporation sometimes cleans and clears some main water courses when the need arises, even though this is the mandate of the Drainage Division. The corporation will periodically remove silt and debris, bush cut and cutlass road verges and sweep streets with the aim of reducing and preventing flooding and stagnation. The Regional Coordinating Committee meeting at the corporation coordinates requests for work to be undertaken by the Ministry of Works and Transport Drainage Division. Requests for the cleaning of major watercourses are addressed at the monthly Regional Coordinating Committee meeting. The officers of the Disaster Management Unit of each regional corporation have been trained to follow a strict incident command system outlined by the DMU protocols. There are also Community Emergency Response Team, CART, members to assist in times of need in rural communities and other remote areas within the region. Communication resources have been installed in those areas to assist with the flow of information in response to reports. Sub-offices have been set up to assist in the pre-positioning and distribution of relief items. The disaster management unit of each corporation, which I must say works extremely well, together with the roads and health department, are poised and ready to assist when called upon by the burgesses of the region. I'm happy to be able to respond so positively that during the national cleanup campaign, we had the opportunity to clear and desilt numerous main watercourses in flood-prone areas, which served as a preparatory work for the rainy season. Also, steps were taken by the regional corporation to mitigate flooding in vulnerable areas.
Minister, Honorable Senators, the time for answering oral questions or notice has expired. Would the Senators agree to allow the Minister to complete his response? Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as I said, I'm happy to be able to respond so positively that during the national cleanup campaign, we had the opportunity to clear and desilt numerous main watercourses in flood-prone areas, which had served as preparatory work for the rainy season. Also, steps were taken by the regional corporation to mitigate flooding in vulnerable areas, which involved routine cleaning with manual and mechanical labor. The cleanup campaign was a national initiative which had tremendous local impact. And I want to thank every corporation without exception for all their efforts, PNM and UNCLI. We had great buy-in from the public, especially the corporation workers, with the support of their respective unions. They all came out on weekends free of charge, and also came out voluntarily to improve their regions, boroughs, and cities. This augurs well for local government reform, if I should say so. And we can already see the local government practitioners and the people working together and taking up the mantle of greater responsibilities in their community.
Senator Richards.
President, Minister, in light of your answer, but we still see significant flooding in the Faisal Anglican School, Orapun Gardens, Sangre and other areas. What is the response of the municipal authorities and city corporations in terms of mitigating the slowly receding water, which is posing quite a threat and an inconvenience and a safety issue at that to many of the burgesses?
Minister.
Well, there is disaster management and there is river clearing. But I just want to go on record to say a river overflows its bank when the carrying capacity of the river is insufficient to meet the runoff. This invariably happens, no matter what you do, in periods of intense torrential rainfall. What we had last night was a unique situation. It was tropical storm condition. So under normal circumstances, you wouldn't expect the rivers to have the capacity to distribute that water on a timely basis. In circumstances like these, you have overflowing of the banks, but it quickly subsides, and the cleanup campaign is more a health issue now than an infrastructural issue. And all, as I said, is a whole of government approach we're taking, and I want to go on record, Madam President, through you, to compliment all the agencies of the state of how that storm was handled last night.
Senator Richards.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Minister, even in light of that and the schedule you outlined for desilting, etc., in many of the waterways, there are some that were not adequately addressed, Maraval being one of them, where there was quite a significant overgrowth of flora and fauna, which put residents and burgesses at risk. So obviously it was not as effective as it should be. What are the corporations doing to address those that would not have been effectively addressed?
Minister.
Obviously, pending the release of funding and in coordination with the Ministry of Works and Transport Draining Division, there has to be a more coordinated effort at river clearing. Unfortunately, we do not capitalize enough on the dry season to clear the water courses, and then we go on a scramble as the rainy season starts. Again, I want to say what happened last night. I think it shows that there was some level of preparation by the government in this regard, and we will continue to give it our best effort in the future.
Senator Richard.
Have the municipal corporations done any assessment of the hilly areas, given the fact that this excessive rainfall we experience has also, in some areas where development has not been authorized, put some of the villages at increased risk for soil integrity, etc.?
Minister.
Well, obviously, that is an accurate statement. We have always lamented the unplanned development that is taking place, especially on the foothills of the northern ranges along the east-west corridor. Strictly speaking, that falls under the Ministry of Planning and Development. It is a major challenge. The Minister of Agriculture is now in a... He said that recently with the Prime Minister there were a million trees that we have started replanting on the slopes in a reforestation program. Hopefully that will assist in time, and then we are making now a stringent effort to curtail unplanned development on the slopes.
Senator Amin.
Thank you, Madam President, the Minister. Having regards to the widespread flooding, particularly in south and central Trinidad, and the after effects of tropical storm breath, can you indicate whether additional resources or what additional resources will be provided to regional corporations that are hard hit, such as Princestown, Mayaro, Rio Claro, Pinal de Bay, Cuba, and so on?
I mean, that question doesn't arise, okay? Senator Ramkisoon.
Thank you, Madam President. Honourable Minister, in your answer, you spoke about the cleanup actions and the cleanup campaign. What is the ministry doing at this time about citizens who continue to dump rubbish or old tires into rivers? That means you're reducing the capacity of rivers and now creating areas of flooding.
Obviously, that's a matter at its highest level is about civic responsibility. All we can do is enforce the laws through the police service, and in particular, what the regional corporation has jurisdiction over, which are the litter wardens. I know the minister, when I was the Minister of Rural Development, and with the current minister, we are making a renewed effort to re-energize the litter warden system and to make it more effective. But beyond that, I want to call on the nation to be civic-minded, and we cannot police you 24 hours a day. People have to step up to the plate now in Trinidad and Tobago and understand the action can have grave consequences to this nation.
Thank you, Madam President. Could the Honourable Minister indicate to us, in terms of the cleanup campaign that he mentioned earlier, whether this campaign will be an annual activity or whether it's a one-off exercise that we would have witnessed in 2017?
Minister.
Well, I'm not quite certain. Initially, it was carded to be a one-off campaign. If it can morph into an annual event, I see nothing wrong with that. But what we need at the level of the regional corporation, that's why we're going so strongly into local government reform. There has to be continuity of projects and continuity of policy and action. And each regional corporation, once empowered under the local government reform system, which will be coming to Parliament in the next term, I see a bright future for the regional corporation, empowered regional corporation to handle their own municipal affairs.
Senator Ramkisoon.
Thank you, Madam President. In relation to the litter officers, I'm not sure if that's the correct name, wardens, the litter wardens, how many are there in Trinidad right now? And if you don't know the answer, because I've never really seen anyone because of the braveness of the citizens, can you share with us if there would be a new policy for these litter wardens to operate at? I know you want to revitalize
Senator
it.
Ramkisoon, you've asked two questions.
Oh, I apologize.
You've asked about the number and you've asked about the policy. Minister.
I can't recall the exact figure. Strange enough, I knew that last year. But we are, it's all about management. And I think somewhere along the line, the regional corporation management allowed it to slip through the crack. And I think with renewed management and a renewed effort, while the numbers will always not be sufficient, we can really get more out of them in the shortest possible time.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Senator Ramdeen.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for this opportunity. Madam President, I hereby seek your leave to move the adjournment of the Senate today, under Standing Order 16, for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance. That is, Madam President, the failure of the Children's Authority to carry out its responsibility under the law to protect our children. The latest failure resulting on Sunday night in a 14-year-old child taking his own life while in a safe house in Valsayn, under the care and protection of the Children's Authority. The matter is definite because it pertains specifically to the failure of the authority to discharge its functions as defined under Section 5 of the Children's Authority Act, Chapter 4610, to protect and care for our most vulnerable children. The failure of the authority to discharge its functions under the Act places all our vulnerable children at risk. The matter is urgent because on Sunday night, a child in the care and under the control of the authority in a safe house at Valsayn took his own life by hanging himself. There may be other children in that safe house in the same position as that child, and their lives may be at risk as well. The matter is of public importance because the Children's Authority Act, Chapter 4610, states that this body was established to act as the guardian of the children of Trinidad and Tobago. Whatever has gone wrong needs to be addressed urgently, and whoever is responsible for this unfortunate event needs to be held accountable for their actions or inactions. I thank you, Madam President.
I have considered the motion, but I am not satisfied that this matter qualifies under this standing order. Honourable Senators, you will recall, though, that an urgent question was allowed on this issue.
Public business, government business, bills, second reading.
Honourable Senators, the debate on the second reading of the following bill, which was in progress when the Senate adjourned on Tuesday, June the 13th, 2017, will be resumed. A bill entitled, An Act to Establish a System of Plea Discussions and Plea Agreements and for Matters Incidental thereto. Those senators who have spoken on this bill are the Honourable Faris Alwari, Attorney General, mover of the motion, Senator Sean Sobers. Senator Chote.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to speak on this bill. There is nothing objectionable about what is contained in this bill because plea bargaining has existed in the common law for a very long time, and prosecutors and defense attorneys have engaged in what we would describe as plea bargaining arrangements, which have worked well before the courts of Trinidad and Tobago. So the fact that this is a statutory regime, I suppose, will just be an addition to the existing powers which are already used in the courts. My contribution is focused on seeking to align this piece of legislation with other pieces of legislation and with the criminal procedure rules, which is the subject of a legal notice. So, through you, Madam President, I will ask your permission to simply run through the sections and to give my brief comments on these sections. In Section 2, I would respectfully ask the Honorable Attorney General to consider the possibility of, in 2B, at the end of it, including the words, and includes a defendant, simply because that is how an accused person is described in the criminal procedure rules. Under court, may I respectfully suggest that instead of magistrates court, summary court is used, because that's how all of criminal legislation describes magistrates courts. I know that I don't know if the Honorable, Madam President, I don't know if the Honorable Chamber thinks that perhaps I'm being presumptuous about making these submissions in my contribution, because I know that we will probably be going into committee stage when people can put forward their suggestions. But I think that perhaps we might save a little bit of time if I sort of outline some of these suggestions. So unless you stop me, Madam President. Thank you. If we look at page 3 of the legislation, under improper inducement, if you look at subsection C, we talk about an improper inducement being the coercion of an accused person or suspect to enter into a plea discussion, including a threat and so on. May I respectfully suggest that after the word suspect, we include the words by any person. And similarly, in C1, I am respectfully suggesting that after the words to lay a charge, we include the words or cause a charge to be laid. The reason I have asked for the Honorable Attorney General to, through you, Madam President, to consider these possible amendments to what is here is because very often before an accused person or suspect is charged or has any sort of interaction with the prosecutor in the matter, that person comes into contact in the criminal justice system with a variety of police officers. And those police officers may not appear in the actual prosecution, because sometimes charges are laid by complainants who are directed to lay the charges by senior officers. So we want to ensure that there is nobody faceless or nameless in this arrangement, this statutory arrangement. If I may go down the page to D, which talks about the misrepresentation of a material fact by the prosecutor, I am respectfully suggesting that we include or anyone acting on his behalf or anyone involved in the investigation of the matter, for the very same reason that I advanced earlier. In E, which talks about an offer or promise, the fulfillment of which is not, and I'm suggesting that after the not, we consider inserting the words capable of being fulfilled. I just want to make sure that I don't repeat myself. So, if I can move on, may I respectfully suggest that in F, we consider the inclusion of the words by any person after the words accused person or suspect. Now, I pause here to make the comment before I go on to the next point that this piece of legislation does not seem to contemplate the kind of situation where we have private prosecutions. And while private prosecutions are generally speaking rare, in terms of the number of informations and complaints laid in magistrates' courts throughout the country, I think some of them can be very significant and very consuming for the judicial officer involved in the matter. So I would respectfully ask the Attorney General to consider how private prosecutions fit into this statutory framework, or whether it fits into this statutory framework at all. Now, prosecutor, if we may go on to page 4, prosecutor is defined here as the DPP or an attorney at law authorized in writing by the DPP to engage in a plea discussion or conclude a plea agreement. Now, I am a little unclear about this because the DPP has certain powers to allow other persons to prosecute and to take certain decisions within the course of the prosecution. These decisions are usually, these powers are usually given on the condition that before anything is concluded, the director has to give his sign off on it. For example, if you get a fiat to prosecute a matter, you can ask that the director of public prosecutions be notified, let's say that the person wants to enter into a plea agreement, arrangement, and get his blessings for whatever the arrangement is. So I don't know if this really widens the powers or whether it narrows the powers, because the director also has a variety of other things that he can permit a private attorney to do, apart from giving a fiat to prosecute. So I don't know, I don't have a suggestion as to how that may be reworded. I'm just thinking that perhaps, Madam President, consideration should be given to rewording it so that it is clear. In this interpretation section, we have a definition of relative in relation to the victim. Now, we are a society where many persons live or have relationships with persons who may not be connected to them by blood. So what I was going to suggest is that wherever relative is used in the legislation, that perhaps consideration could be given to use of the words appropriate person instead. And I'll just use an example. The A1 talks about the person's parent, step-parent, or guardian. I think that these definitions sort of narrow down the people who might be available to advise and assist within the context of the legislation. So you want to make it so that as many people who wish to engage in the plea bargaining exercise under the statutory scheme are able to do so. And you want to make sure that they are not debarred from doing so because of the definitions of the Act. So perhaps thought could be given, Madam President, to opening it up a bit to include appropriate persons. Now, if we may go to page 5, where we talk about who is a victim under this piece of legislation. 3 persons are identified here. But I ask myself, well, what becomes of the position where the state or the people of Trinidad and Tobago are the victim, as is the case in some corruption offenses, in the case of some proceeds of crime offenses, and so on. I think some thought should be given to that, because some of the offenses included in those pieces of legislation are very serious and attract serious penalties. And I think a policy decision ought to be taken, if it has not already been taken, as to whether the state of Trinidad and Tobago should be included into this category, and if not, why not? Right. I'm moving along. If we may go to page 7. I beg your pardon. Let's go back to page 6. I'm looking at subsection 4B3. I am a little afraid, Madam President, that this subsection is capable of abuse, because the subsection says a prosecutor agrees to take a particular course of action, including an undertaking not to institute charges against family members or friends of the accused person or suspect. Now, this brings me to the very real issues that we have in the prosecution of narcotics offenses or firearm offenses, where officers go to a house and they conduct a search and they find narcotics or firearms and maybe money. Now, I have had the experience, and I think I have spoken of this experience in this Honorable House already, where despite the fact that the law says that you ought not to round up the whole lot of people, including grandmother right down to child, and take them to the police station and keep them there under arrest, what you should be doing is you should be looking to see who is the person you are going to be able to charge as a result of your investigations. I had the actual unfortunate experience of being involved in a matter where exactly the same thing happened. Police went to a particular home, arrested 3 children, 2 of whom were Canadian-born children visiting their father here, who had been separated from their mother, and the 3rd was an autistic child. That child was taken to the police station, kept there. Police looked on while the child had seizures and so on, and had it not been for the gumption of a young attorney at law, who simply walked into the station and walked out with the child, that child may have been kept in custody along with the mother. So I have seen that these situations allow for abuse, because not every cop is a good cop. So I am respectfully suggesting that words along the lines of where there is evidence to sustain a charge should be included, to make sure that an officer simply doesn't round up everybody in an attempt to force the father of the house or whoever it is, or the son, to plead guilty to the charge, saying, well, if you plead guilty, I'll let the rest of you go. If I may move on to page 7. Again, this one is just a question of language. Roman numeral 8. May I respectfully suggest, Madam President, a promise to proceed summarily rather than indictably. Now, there is something that I thought about today, which is missing from this piece of legislation. Now, the way plea bargaining operates in the common law, it usually takes place if the prosecution has a witness who may be unwilling to testify, time having passed, especially in the where you have sexual offenses, or it may take place simply because so much time has passed that the prosecutor is willing to accept a plea to a lesser count. So instead of the attempted murder for which the person may be indicted, the prosecutor may be willing to accept a plea of guilty to an offense under Section 14 against the Offenses Against the Persons Act, wounding, unlawful wounding. So I thought that the statutory scheme was basically going to be putting out conditions where there would be new reasons for there to be agreement. So let's have a narcotics case. If it were that the person was willing to give information about those, let's say it's a woman who has been sent to take narcotics to the United Kingdom. I thought that inclusion of these circumstances would have made the statutory framework different from the existing common law framework. And I don't know if consideration at this stage can still be given to that. So you identify certain situations where the state gets something in exchange for the plea bargain, because as it is, this is a plea bargain, but I'm not quite sure what is being exchanged. And certainly if there is an incentive for law enforcement to get useful information through this scheme, then I respectfully suggest that that ought to be considered in the wording of the drafting. Now, certainly.
Thank you for allowing me to interrupt, and thank you for these suggestions. Are you thinking along the line of a statutory discount expressed so that there is an incentive-based position for that which is to be exchanged?
No, I'm simply thinking of, through you, Madam President, I'm simply thinking about, let's say, fact situations, specific fact situations or scenarios which could be specifically addressed and which might make the legislation more pointed and more useful and more likely to be used. Because the fact is, we have plea bargaining legislation in existence for many years. It was never used. In fact, I remember once being in the magistrate's court in Arima before a very experienced magistrate, and the prosecutor and the defense attorney were saying that they were working out an arrangement under the legislation, and it was the first time that the magistrate had had parties seek to use the legislation. So I would respectfully suggest that as it stands, we need to have something to make this legislation something more than an act sitting on the books, as was its predecessor. And I'm respectfully suggesting that this may be one of the ways that we can do so. Section 5, with respect to 5B, I was going to suggest during the inquiry stage, because we don't have committal proceedings as yet. Persons are committed to stand trial, but committal proceedings, unfortunately, are not here yet. What we have are preliminary inquiries where witness statements are filed and persons may be cross-examined on that. So the lingo, I think, perhaps should be different. If I may move on to page 8, section 7, to bring this in line with other legislation, in particular the trial by judge alone legislation, which we have very recently been looking at. No improper inducement, offer, threat, or promise, I respectfully suggest, is how that first line should be read. Subsection 8, sorry, I beg your pardon, section 8 says a prosecutor shall not initiate or participate in a plea discussion or conclude a plea agreement that requires the accused person or suspect to plead guilty to an offense that is not disclosed by the evidence. I think we have to have a look or keep an eye on the criminal procedure rules, in particular 7.3 subsection 1 on the issue of disclosure, and marry that into our discussions about disclosure under this piece of legislation. Because you don't want to have confusion by having the rules set out certain guidelines for disclosure to be done in the case management process, and a statute which permits or which is ambiguous about when disclosure should be made, what is disclosable, and so on. Because it would mean that the statute which you would like to have people use to speed up the system would not be used at all. Right. If we may go on to section 10. Now, I am not seeing in this piece of legislation, perhaps I'm missing it. The subsection 10 says a prosecutor shall not initiate a plea discussion with an accused person who is not represented by an attorney at law. I am not seeing any specific references to vulnerable suspects or accused persons, children, mentally subnormal people, and that sort of thing. I don't know if that is included here. When we are talking as well, when we are talking about people who are not represented by an attorney at law, and we have a nice certificate at the end which they can sign off on, perhaps some consideration could be given to making it mandatory for a psychological and psychiatric evaluation to be done on the person who is unrepresented before we have him or her sign off on that certificate. Because I have seen too many cases in our criminal justice system where persons who are mentally challenged for one reason or another, whether because of inherited problems, trauma, whatever it is, they are convicted, and then time and money is spent in the judicial system through the appellate procedure where these tests are done. So if you want to have this piece of legislation expedite the process, you don't want to set it up in such a way that you simply appeal it and then the expedition which you've gained at the lower level is totally nullified because fresh evidence is adduced at the Court of Appeal and the matter is sent back to the lower level. If we may go to page 9, Roman numeral 2, may I respectfully suggest there as well, instead of third party of his choice, that we use the words an appropriate adult of his choice. And the reason for this actually came about during discussions I was participating in with respect to amendments of the children's legislation. And one of the things you don't want to have happen, let's say you have a young person who's in custody and who is unrepresented. The paternal figure for that young person, or the person who might be called, might be the gang leader of the area where you have street gangs. So you want to ensure that when you allow an adult to come to give advice or to be there to protect the interests of the young person, that that person is an appropriate adult. Now, if we may go to page 10, and we are looking, Madam President, at section 11. It's talking about plea discussions being initiated before charges are laid. I would respectfully suggest that plea discussions should not take place unless full disclosure has been made to the suspect or to the accused person. We pride our criminal justice system, or one of the few things that we pride our criminal justice system is the fact that we constantly strive to ensure that there is equality of arms when somebody is brought before a court as an individual by the state. So our legislation, even though it sounds liberal-minded, and we are referred to as bleeding hearts when we talk about taking steps to ensure that balance, it's actually a fundamental principle of the rule of law, that you must have equality of arms in any case which comes before the court. And for that reason, I would respectfully submit that a person who pleads not guilty is entitled to full disclosure under the criminal procedure rules. So we want to ensure that someone who pleads guilty has the same sort of protection by being able to appreciate and understand the case that he has been charged with and that he's pleading guilty to. Section 12 on that same page, 12B, which talks about the situation where the accused person is advised of his right to apply for an attorney at law under the legal aid and advice system for the purpose of entering into a plea discussion. In a sense, accused persons are always advised that they are entitled to have an attorney at law from the legal aid and advisory authority. In fact, there is a system, the duty counsel system, where from the time persons are arrested and kept in custody, police officers are mandated to source or to contact the legal aid and advisory authority to have persons on the duty counsel list attend at the station where the person is being held. And I don't think that this section really takes that into account. And another point that I wish to make with respect to legal aid representation is if the magistrate explains to the person that you are entitled to have an attorney from the legal aid authority to help you enter into these plea discussions. The reality is that it often takes several months before an attorney is appointed. In the High Court, it's much quicker, not so in the Magistrates Court. Because what happens, the procedure is that a form is filled out, it's then sent off by the clerk of the peace after it's signed by the magistrate to the Office of the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority. And this can take considerable time. When I think what you want to have happen is that where somebody is willing to enter into a plea bargain, enter into plea bargaining under this legislation, you want to make sure that it happens quickly and that he doesn't change his mind, presumably. Now, I must say, the part of this piece of legislation that caused me some concern was Part 3, which talks about the victim impact statement. It's Section 13. Now, let me start by saying that the criminal procedure rules, in particular 17(9)(3)(a), says that the prosecution must provide information, including any statement of the effect of the offense on the victim's family, or persons connected to the victims of the offense. Now, this section is worded in such a way that it goes far beyond that. It is giving a victim a right which in law victims do not have. In a sense, it is a legal concession that is now being worked into our legal system, where victims are being allowed not to give victim statements in the way in which we see on American TV. That's to say, you come to the microphone and you know, there is just an outburst of pain and sometimes vitriol against the person who's about to be sentenced. I don't think that is contemplated in our jurisdiction, and it certainly finds no place in any of the legislation that exists. So I would respectfully suggest through you, Madam President, that the word right not be used. And this whole section is disjointed when you...
Senator Chote, you have 5 more minutes.
Oh dear, how time flies when you're having fun. So I'll just try to speed through the remainder of it. This whole section, I think this is particularly important. You actually put a person at a disadvantage by having this section in and by having it worded in this way. Because it means somebody who wants to plead under the statutory scheme basically is not going to know what the victim impact statement is going to contain until after he is pleaded guilty. And at that stage, of course, if he is unrepresented, it may be difficult for him to consider all the material and to make an appropriate response. If he has an attorney at law, there may be contentious matters then raised, and the attorney at law may very well want to now cross-examine the victim, which was a thing you were trying to avoid in the first place, ending cross-examinations of victims, particularly in sexual offenses matters or where children were involved in this kind of thing. So I would respectfully suggest that this whole section be looked at very carefully. If we may go to 18, which is on page 13, I think perhaps we can insert at 2E the word information. If we go to, oh, I beg your pardon. That's my mistake. Oh yes, it's page 14, and I was looking at section 19. Complaint or draft indictment in the case of committal proceedings. So I've already spoken about my difficulty with respect to committal proceedings, but since you're talking about a draft indictment, which is a piece of paper that lays a charge, what I respectfully suggest is that you replace committal proceedings with the word information. Let me see. Just to round up, in the forms at the back, Madam President, I'd respectfully suggest that the declarations that have to be made by the accused person should include the fact that the accused person has not only been not induced, but that he's not been promised, forced, or threatened. So I am respectfully seeking that that be amended. Section 24, 1. (3D), I am not sure of the purpose for this, the reading of the victim impact statement based on the principles that I have referred to, generally speaking, when I spoke about section 13. And I make the point that too much importance is being placed on the victim impact statement at a stage where you may actually contradict or stop the expeditious process that you wish to have. So, Madam President, thank you very much for the opportunity to make this contribution.
Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you. Madam President, thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this bill. And I must say, Madam President, I enjoyed Senator Chote's contribution because I don't think anywhere else in this country we'll get 40 minutes of a senior counsel's time at the price we're paying. Madam President, the reality is that I don't think any one of us in here could seriously dispute the importance of a system of plea bargaining or plea discussion. I don't think we could dispute that. What the Attorney General has brought is not brand new legislation. We have legislation already. And what he has brought is a bill to improve what we have. And I think the most we can do on this bill is to propose amendments or improvements to the bill. But I don't think any one of us could seriously argue against the need for plea discussion legislation and an improvement on what we have. Madam President, the plea discussion legislation cannot stand on its own. And it is very important that we understand how it fits into what has to be done. And let me just reflect a little bit, Madam President, because when I saw the image in March 2017, I said, if ever I'm given the opportunity to speak in the Senate on anything relating to crime, I would tell my colleagues in the Senate how I felt when I saw the image in early March. It was in Newsday newspaper, and on the front page of the newspaper, I believe it might have been March 4th, 2017, there was a young lady who I, upon reading, discovered was Kerry Edwards, age 14, and she was consumed. That's from the photo. You could see she was consumed with grief, overwhelmed as she bent over her father, Terry Edwards, who had just been shot and killed, I believe it was in Davie. A 14-year-old losing her father in any circumstances, but in particular those circumstances. And one of the things that we miss, Madam President, is that as the numbers add up, we miss the real victims of the failures of our criminal justice system. And that is all those children who have been left behind without one, and in some cases, both parents. When I looked at Kerry Edwards on the Newsday, I felt, as a legislator in my own right, but as a parliament, we ought to really do better as we debate this thing called the criminal justice system. And let me tell you why. Because the reality is this, Madam President. The chances of the person who killed the father of Kerry Edwards, the chances of that person being apprehended is very small. The data tells us that it's under 15% what the police service refer to as a detection rate. It's under 15%. And if that person was to be found, Madam President, it would be on average about 8 years before an indictment could be preferred against that person, on average. And assuming that that indictment takes place, the chances of a successful prosecution is going to be less than 15%. And that is the reality. And what every time we bring a piece of legislation dealing with the criminal justice system, that is the reality we must face first. That our level, our frequency of apprehending and charging an indictment is very low. And our success rate in prosecutions is also very low. And in fact, when the Director of Public Prosecutions was invited in 2014 to the now famous workshop to discuss this bill, he made a very, very valid point, which I agree with. And that is that the driving force behind plea bargaining and the reason why in the United States, for example, plea bargaining is used in 95% of the disposition of matters is that there is a real risk, a real chance that an accused would be convicted. And what we are up against is not the fact that some of us may disagree or agree with plea bargaining. We all agree with it. What we are up against is the fact that a reality that the reason why plea bargaining has not worked and has not been used as much as we would have liked it to be used in Trinidad and Tobago is because there is no real fear on the part of criminal accused of a conviction. And in order for plea bargaining, notwithstanding anything that is written in the bill, in order for plea discussion or plea bargaining to actually work, we have upon us a bigger task. And a bigger task is to fix the criminal justice system. And that is the reality. In a criminal justice trial, there are a number of things that are required, and there are several pieces of legislation dealing with the various things in a criminal trial. Madam President, I've made this point before. As legislators, it is very important that we always remind ourselves that we can sit here and frame legislation and pass legislation, but outside this parliament, a series of institutions charged with the implementation of what we create. And the real failure in our society is not within the walls of the parliament, but outside these walls in the institutions. And I just want to bring our attention back as we discuss plea discussion and plea bargaining. I just want to bring our minds back as an example of how good legislation and good legislative intention could go to waste in the hands of the bureaucrats we have outside the walls of this parliament. DNA, Madam President, there is no question in the minds of any criminal law practitioner or non-practitioner like me that DNA is vital. A system which allows us to use DNA evidence is vital to any criminal prosecution in 2017. In fact, Madam President, when we go back to 2001, it was vital 16 years ago. And in 2001, then Attorney General, in 2000, then Attorney General Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj brought to the Parliament DNA legislation, and it was passed. And it was enacted into law, Act number 27 of 2000. And Madam President, not long after, on March 7, 2001, then Attorney General Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj was asked a question by the then MP for Laventille East Morva, Mr. Hines. And the question was related to the implementation of that piece of legislation. And in his answer, Mr. Maharaj set out why, having been passed by Parliament, debated and agreed amongst legislators in both houses, that legislation could not, even in that form, be enacted. And he listed 8 things that I would refer to. The regulations had not been prepared. The database had not been put in place. The equipment and facilities had not been acquired. The board, the DNA board, had not been appointed. The scientific staff had not been trained. Cold storage facilities at each police station had not been put into place. 2001. And thereafter, DNA as part of our criminal justice system languished. And then in 2011, the then Minister of Justice, Mr. Volney, himself a former judge and someone who practiced criminal law and was very versed in it, brought legislation seeking to improve the 2000 legislation that had barely been used. And again, advocated and regaled the Parliament with the need for improvements in DNA against which nobody could argue, Madam President. Nobody could argue. And in dealing with the 2011 bill that he brought, Mr. Volney talked about the failure, 10 years at that time, of this country to have appropriate DNA evidence legislation in place. And Madam President, I think the whole country, notwithstanding the passage of that piece of legislation, I am sure the whole country was surprised on June 4, 2017, when Ria Tate, writing in the Express under the headline, "No DNA tests on deportees," reported on the work of the Joint Select Committee on National Security, which had tabled its report a couple days before. And I'm sure to everybody's surprise, Ria Tate, the journalist, told the country that of the 13 requirements for the full implementation of the DNA legislation, only 4 had been met. The issue of the DNA data bank had not been resolved, and several of the things required to give effect to the use of DNA evidence in this country as part of the criminal justice system had not been put in place, notwithstanding the passage of 6 years. And the point I'm making, Madam President, is that there is no single piece of legislation that would act as a magic wand when brought and passed in this House that would reverse or curtail what we face out there in relation to criminal justice. I've said it before, Madam President. I enjoy no special facilities, and many of us and most of us don't. Madam President, look at the last few days. Looking at the video of a couple pulling in front of their house, their home there, to go to the 4th floor apartment that they lived in, and being gunned down in a form of and fashion in a way that could happen to any one of us. Somebody so brazen to be able to fire shots and go twice and reload and return.
Diabolical.
And then yesterday, Madam President, I myself made the remark that the one thing that Brett would stop for a few hours is crime. And within a few minutes, I heard about not 1, not 2, but 3 bodies lying on a basketball court in Laventille, shoeless. And Madam President, I don't know about anybody else. I have 3 children, 23, 19, and 11.
And you're looking so nice.
And I am extremely worried. I'm extremely worried about where we are and the urgency of fixing this thing we constantly talk about, the criminal justice system. And Madam President, I know that there is a temptation, and you know, as politicians, the politicians on these 2 benches, as politicians we have to engage in political combat. But you know what? When we go back to 2001, for example, with Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj as Attorney General, and I think in 1999, he may have set a record by treating with, in one parliamentary year, treating with 101 pieces of legislation before the House. 30% of those dealing directly with crime in 1 year. And when you go back to the Hansard, for example, and every AG brings one of these administration of justice miscellaneous bills. When you go back to the Hansard, for example, I'm using one example of May 7, 2001, and you see the opening words of Mr. Maharaj at the time. The government has come in to pursue an aggressive legislative agenda to reform the criminal justice system. Every Attorney General says that. And then he goes through what he has to do, and he goes through not 1, not 2, not 3, but 14 pieces of legislation relating to the reform of the criminal justice system. 14. Because not one single bill, not this bill before us today, or any single bill, will fix the system. And when you look at, for example, my former classmate, Mr. Ram Logan, in his time as Attorney General, in 2014, for example, April 11, 2014, coming to this House with a miscellaneous provisions bill 2014, like every other Attorney General before him and everyone after. A miscellaneous provision bill dealing with several things that he wants to do in the criminal justice system. And in his contribution on that miscellaneous bill, Mr. Ramlogan, and this is 2014, referred to work that he had already done. And he referred to the Anti-Gang Act, very controversial eventually, the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Act, the Bail Amendment Act, the DNA Act, the Administration of Justice Electronic Monitoring Act, the Data Protection Act, the FIU Act, Firearms Amendment Act, Interception of Private Communications Act, Miscellaneous Provisions Kidnapping and Bail Act, Trafficking in Persons Act, Bacteriological, Biological and Toxic Weapons Act, Securities Act. And then at the end, he says, there will be 3 new laws I would bring. One would deal with cybercrime, one will deal with cybersecurity agency, plea bargaining. So having referred to 14 or 15 pieces of legislation already in place, Senator Ramlogan, as he was then, as the Attorney General, talked about and forecasted 3 more. And in this single contribution, Madam President, Mr. Ramlogan referred to 17 pieces of legislation. And still, in 2017, notwithstanding countless hours of debate in both houses and hundreds of pieces of legislation or things that impact pieces of legislation, in early May, Madam President, young Kerry Edwards was uncontrollable in her grief, crying over the murder of her father. And I can say that I felt powerless because I could not offer any assurance to her. If I met her, I could not offer her any assurance as a legislator that anything I do would have the impact on the criminal justice system. And I will tell you again why. Because what we do in here is only part of the work, and the real work falls outside there in the implementation and a bureaucracy that over time has failed to step up to give effect to what the Parliament has done. And that is the true failing, whether it is in the court, whether it is in the police service, that more and more when you look at that, and I'm on record, Madam President, I am not a fan of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I am not a fan of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And every time I pass police officers in the police canteen, every time I pass down by the barracks and I see the police vehicles parked up there, used, unused, savaged, destroyed, whatever, I know that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service forms part of a critical failing of the criminal justice system. And that is where we are, Madam President. It is not about agreeing or disagreeing with the plea bargaining, the plea discussion, but it's not about disagreeing with it. I don't think there is much to disagree with. But it is important that as a Parliament, we work together to ensure that what we create as legislation is given life outside the walls of this place. That is where the real problem is. Because, Madam President, before I go into the bill, let me just use one piece of data. which from the moment I wrote about it years ago, it was convincing then and it is convincing now. Toronto is a city known to all of us. And there was a time in Toronto's history that murders had reached 500. And the Canadian government focused on that figure of 500. Noticed that the cause of most homicides, or the most homicides in Toronto, were caused by firearms, and focused on firearms legislation and legislation to make sure that people would not be inclined to carry firearms or to use firearms. And over a period of time, not only by doing that, by doing the several things that were required, Toronto was able to bring its murder rates to a far lower level. For example, Madam President, the most startling thing is that in the last 5 years, for Toronto, which has a significantly greater population than ours, the number of murders for the last 5 years in total is lower than our average number of murders for the last 5 years. In other words, there are more persons killed in Trinidad in 1 year than in the last 5 years in Toronto, a big city with immigrants from all over the world, a melting pot, bringing in all sorts of cultural and religious differences into a society, and a justice system, including a police system, that manages in a real way to keep law and order. And that is where you start to understand that there is an urgency, not just in this bill that is before us, but in the entire criminal justice system, the various pieces of legislation, including this thing called the Preliminary Inquiries Act, this move to get away from the wastage of time with PIs and get along to faster trials. This bill, Madam President, proposes to improve what already exists. And I would leave it to the Attorney General to respond to Senator Chote's suggestions. But I opened with a caution that we would not get that quality of advice at the price we've gotten today. So I'm sure we would pay close attention to what Senator Chote has said. But Madam President, as I go into the bill, let me just respond to two things, 2 points made by Senator Sobers in his contribution on the last day. The first I'll dismiss right away is his statement or his concern that in the last 20 months, this government has not been able to fix the problems in the magistracy. Well, the reality is that in the last 20 years, no government has been able to fix the problems in the magistracy. None. None of us have been able to do that. And the second point is in his reference to an academic paper which he used in support of his argument against the system of plea bargaining. And I just wanted to say one thing, and that is that Senator Sobers did not, he left out an important part of that academic paper. The writer analyzed both the pros and cons and concluded that she was not in support of a system of plea bargaining. But it was on one premise that he did not mention, and that is a system of plea bargaining would not work where you had an opportunity to waive a jury trial. In other words, the writer was saying a system of plea bargaining should not be used where you have the opportunity for a judge-only trial. And that was the argument the writer was making. The writer did not make an argument solely against plea bargaining, but it was against plea bargaining in the context of the waiver of a jury trial. No, he didn't. Madam President, the bill before us has a very simple purpose. And the purpose is to allow a prosecutor and an accused to enter into discussions with the intention of arriving at a plea agreement. That is the simple purpose of the bill. And the plea agreement, if it is struck between the parties, essentially involves the accused agreeing to plead guilty to a specific offense or to perform obligations which are set out in the agreement in exchange for an undertaking of the prosecutor. That is essentially what the agreement is. It is based on a discussion between the prosecutor and the accused with the intention of arriving at an agreement, and the agreement requires the accused to plead guilty to a specific offense or to perform specified obligations in exchange for an undertaking by the prosecutor. The bill covers, in its construct, from Clause 5 to Clause 12, the nature of the plea discussions. As Senator Chote has pointed out, the bill then goes into, in clauses 13 to 18, the victim impact statements. And the victim impact statements in this bill, Madam President, is a significant expansion on what is contained in the existing legislation. And Madam President, as I go into the bill, let me just say, when this bill was debated in the other place, it was very clear from the opposition leader that she was in support of the bill, and she supported the bill, and she set out why she was in support of the bill. With one exception, she felt at that time that there should be an opportunity to cross-examine the person who has given the victim impact statement. That was the one difficulty she had, the opposition leader had with the bill. I would also say that I think Mr. Rambharat is surely the most experienced member of the criminal bar in the other place. And in the opposition bench, he may be the only one with experience in the other place. I know Senator Sturge is a star in this place. In the other place. And again, Mr. Rambharat in his contribution was in full support, as far as I understood it, of the bill. But the single difference or difficulty the opposition leader had related to the issue of cross-examination of the victim in relation to the sections of the victim impact statement. Madam President, the bill also goes on to provide for plea hearings, a process of a hearing to deal with the plea agreement. It provides that clause 28 and 29, for an appeal. And this appeal is broken into two areas. The first is that clause 28 provides for an accused person to appeal to the Court of Appeal in an event where the plea agreement has been rejected. Because, of course, Madam President, as it is in the current legislation and as it is in this bill and in various forms of this piece of legislation that appears around the world, it is not for the prosecutor and the accused to arrive and finalize this agreement. It is for the court ultimately preserving its jurisdiction to finally approve or disapprove of a plea agreement. And clause 28 provides for the accused person to appeal to the Court of Appeal in the event the court has rejected a plea agreement. And alongside that, Madam President, clause 29 provides for the Director of Public Prosecution to have a similar right in the event a plea agreement is rejected by the court, a right to appeal to the Court of Appeal. Madam President, clause 30 provides a very important provision, and that is for an accused to withdraw from a plea agreement before sentence. An important provision for an accused who has already entered into a plea agreement to withdraw from that agreement. Towards the end, Madam President, the bill provides, a savings clause, which is standard, given the fact that we have an existing piece of legislation.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you. The bill provides in clause 36 that any actions, proceedings, and decisions taken in respect of plea discussions or plea agreements commenced or taken under the former act would be preserved. So, Madam President, subject to what those who come after me may say, I think the merits of this bill are rooted in a few things. The first is that none of us could argue against the importance of an opportunity for a prosecutor and an accused in well-demarcated circumstances to enter into a plea agreement. None of us could argue against that. The second thing is that very few of us, subject to what I've said, in relation to what DPP Gaspard said in 2014, that the attractiveness or the desire for a plea agreement is lost where an accused does not feel that he is at risk or she is at risk and does not have a fear of a conviction. And that is something that only a comprehensive criminal justice system reformed through the work of this Parliament and reformed through the implementation of what we've agreed to in legislation by persons outside these walls, that is a fear only to be created by that type of reform. I don't think we could argue against it. In this House, based on the work of Attorney General, as he then was, Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj, and work undertaken by then Attorney General Anand Ram Logan, and work now undertaken by Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi, it is something that as political parties we've subscribed to and we've grappled with from 1999 when the legislation was first brought in the form of a bill. We've grappled with it. and none of us could seriously dispute the desire to have it enacted into legislation. This is important legislation, Madam President, but we must not lose sight of the fact that its importance is only as good as the way in which it fits into a criminal justice system that requires more than just this bill. It requires a series of reforms, all of which must be implemented by persons outside of here. There is no reason for us not to support. We can argue on improvements of this bill, Madam President, but we cannot argue seriously that it is not an important piece of legislation that needs improvement. I thank you.
Senator Ramdeen.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to join in this debate on an act to establish a system of plea discussions and plea agreements and for matters incidental thereto. And I want to follow suit from the last government speaker, Madam President, and join Senator Rambharat in saying that this piece, the Honourable Minister, in endorsing the comments that this piece of legislation is a piece of legislation that has spanned different administrations. We've already been given the history by the Honourable Minister of Agriculture from the then Attorney General, Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj, to the present Attorney General, and what steps were taken by different administrations to put in place a system of plea agreement and plea discussions. I would like to start my contribution, Madam President, by thanking the Attorney General for listening to the comments that were made in the other place, because the bill as presented here in the Senate has taken on board a number of comments and a number of suggestions that were made. And I think the Attorney General has done well in listening to some of those comments. And I think over the past two debates that we've had here, I think that the way in which the government and the opposition has worked together to ensure that good legislation is passed is something that we should all be thankful for. I think it endorses what we have said as an opposition, Madam President, that the opposition will assist the government in passing good legislation that secures the rights of citizens in this country and will advance the aims of bettering the criminal justice system, which I think no one can challenge is the aim of any administration, whether it be on that side or on this side. I also would like to thank, Madam President, and join in the Attorney General in thanking the late Ms. Dana Sital, Senior Counsel, and the contribution that has been made by Ms. Pamela Elder to the final work product that has been produced by the Attorney General for us to debate here. And having said that on one side, Madam President, I want to also level a certain degree of criticism, because it cannot be right for an Attorney General to indicate to the Senate that in passing and having consultations with respect to this piece of legislation, that the Attorney General sought the views of the Law Association and was not provided with any assistance by a body that is statutorily mandated to advance the public interest in legal matters, and that cannot be right. And I hope that the experience of the Attorney General with respect to this piece of legislation that is not repeated in any attempt to pass any other piece of legislation and have consultation with a body such as the Law Association. It is something that we should deprecate to the highest degree. Now, Madam President, the purpose of my contribution this afternoon is to join all of the speakers in saying that this is a piece of legislation that no one can deny can have the impact of assisting and advancing the aims of the criminal justice system. And in saying that, I think we should all recognize that the aim of the criminal justice system is not simply to prosecute persons, but it is also to provide justice to the victims of crime. And I think a certain part of the legislation aims at satisfying that aim of providing justice to the victims And I will demonstrate by reference to real-life examples as to how the criminal justice system, in using plea bargaining, can impose a certain degree of injustice to members of the criminal justice system. But I want to go back to a point that the Honourable Minister of Agriculture made in reference to the Terry Edwards example that he gave. A very real example to all of us. Because I think all of us, as a society, felt a certain degree of worry, hurt, anger, when one saw that incident that the Honourable Minister referred to, where the lives of 3 citizens were snuffed out, and the children of those victims, not a criticism of the government, Madam President, but the victims, they needed counselling and were crying out for counselling in the aftermath of losing their parents. Now, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture made reference to the reality of what we have to deal with. And in answer to that, is it that as a parliament that we must just accept that reality and pass legislation to fit into a reality that doesn't meet the aims of the criminal justice system? And I submit, Madam President, that we can't do that. We cannot accept the reality as it is now. We have to change that reality. And whether that change of the reality is by virtue of legislation or fixing all of the things that are broken in the criminal justice system, the point is we have to get hold of it and as a society make an attempt to fix it. Now, I think that a good starting point to determine how we move forward with this piece of legislation is to really center on what the main driver in this piece of legislation has said about this piece of legislation and about plea discussion and plea agreement. And that is the Director of Public Prosecution, Mr. Roger Gaspard. A man who I think we all have great respect for and has performed the duty of Director of Public Prosecution, ma'am, in a most honorable way. And if I can make reference, Madam President, to the way in which the Director of Public Prosecution only a few weeks ago dealt with a very critical issue that arose in our criminal justice system with respect to those 53 matters that were sent back to the magistrate court, I think we must all compliment Mr. Roger Gaspard for the way in which he discharges his public functions as the Director of Public Prosecution. And, Madam President, I really want to carefully make reference to what Mr. Gaspard has said about this plea bargaining and plea discussion matter, because I think from his own words, we as a Senate, both on the government side, on the independent side, and on the opposition side, can really understand the task that we have embarked upon and how this piece of legislation can fit or can work in the criminal justice system. And, Madam President, the comments of Mr. Gaspard, Senior Counsel, were echoed when certain questions were asked to him in public by a member of the opposition, Mr. Rambharat, on the 7th of April 2017. And this is what Mr. Gaspard had to say, Madam President, and if you would allow me, I think it is very, very important. I know, this is Mr. Gaspard, I know you have come, I'm quoting from the Joint Select Committee on National Security in public that was done on the 17th of April 2017. Mr. Gaspard was asked, Madam President, as to set the foundation. Director, we have also impending plea bargaining, which I know, if properly used, could be an incredibly useful tool. What is your state of preparedness in anticipation of that? And this is what Mr. Gaspard had to say. Mr. Vice Chair, I know that you have been someone who has done a lot of work in the criminal arena, and I would remind you that even without the Plea Bargaining Act, whether the one from 1999 or the one currently being proposed, the DPP's office has been in the business of bargaining pleas. Persons have been charged with murder, and you have a plea bargain process informally, and that would have been ongoing for quite some time. So some persons are of the view that with the passage of plea bargaining legislation, the volume of pleas is likely to swell exponentially. that type of thinking might be slightly misplaced. It is my experience that what determines whether or not persons are inclined to enter into plea negotiations and plea bargaining is usually the strength of the evidence, the type of evidence upon which the state relies. And then he makes reference, Madam President, and this is what I want to take further in my contribution. For instance, some persons would canvass before you that in the United States, almost 90 to 95% of criminal cases go the way of plea bargaining. Well, in the United States, greater reliance is placed on scientific evidence than obtains here. So accused persons and defense counsel may be of the view that because we rely so heavily on, say, eyewitness accounts and caution statements and so on, within those ambits there is a lot of room for play. So while we can all understand the noble aims of the government in bringing plea bargaining legislation, Madam President, we can pass as much legislation, as the Honourable Minister has said, as we want. But if we don't address the problems of the criminal justice system that would make this legislation useful, then we would be, I don't want to say we would be engaging in an exercise of futility, but what we will do is really be passing legislation, and the foundation for that legislation to work will not be there. So if I can suggest to the government, there are two things that Mr. Gaspard said are the problems that he identifies with the criminal justice system and why plea bargaining doesn't work. The first is eyewitness accounts. Almost every prosecution in this country depends upon eyewitness accounts. It depends upon persons coming forward and volunteering evidence to assist the prosecution in prosecuting persons who break the law. And the difficulty that we have, Madam President, and what we've had for a number of years, since Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj was Attorney General, then to now, and it hasn't changed, is that we haven't been able to put in place a proper system to allow those persons who are able to give evidence to get the protection of the law when they come forward to give evidence on behalf of the prosecution. And therefore, I want to suggest to the Attorney General that in addition to plea bargaining legislation, that the government looks carefully at the Justice Protection Act. And therefore, we try to fix the Justice Protection Act, because I think the Honourable Attorney General, I wrote to him myself in relation to the matter that concerns the loss of life of three citizens of this country, Madam President. And I'm not going to go into the facts, but I'm just going to say that it is an extremely disturbing fact that we have to deal with as a country, that we can have 8 police officers charged before the court on murder of 3 civilians. That is something that should send shivers up everybody's spine, because it, like the Honourable Minister of Agriculture has said, it can happen to any one of us. Crime doesn't pick whether it attacks the UNC, the Independence, or the PNM. It is a risk to every single one of us. So, is my suggestion to the Attorney General, if we can look at the Justice Protection Act and strengthen that piece of legislation so that those persons who willingly come forward to assist the prosecution and put their lives at risk, that at the end of the day, the state can offer them some kind of protection. And right now, Madam President, I can say there is a situation that I will bring to the attention of the Attorney General, where a family willingly entered under the provisions of the Justice Protection Act, gave evidence in a matter. Unfortunately, those persons were not convicted. And after those persons were not convicted, those persons who risked their lives were taken from Trinidad and sent to another Caribbean island, were just abandoned by the state. And they have returned to Trinidad, their lives are at risk, their children are at risk, and they don't know what to do. And if that is the experience that we use, or that other persons see as the experience of persons who assist in the prosecution of crime, that is, one understands why the Director of Public Prosecution would say, we have a serious problem in getting persons to come forward and give evidence. And that leads to the second issue that was raised by the Director of Public Prosecutions, which is the reliance on cautionary statements. It is the habit, the practice of the police that the only way the police will prosecute crime is if they force somebody to give a cautionary statement. And the reason why what the Honorable Minister of Agriculture referred to as the detection rates are so low and the prosecution and conviction rates are so low is because at the end of the day, when you rely on cautionary statements to found a prosecution, you leave gaping holes for lawyers to take advantage of. And so today I want to make another suggestion to the Honorable Attorney General, which is that before we operationalize legislation such as plea bargaining and plea agreement legislation, let us put in every charge room, in every police station in Trinidad and Tobago, a system whereby those cautionary statements can be monitored outside of the police service by an independent body, so that when cautionary statements come before the court, there will be an independent way of verifying whether those persons were promised or oppressed, beaten, or whatever. But it will definitely provide a certain degree of independent evidence that will assist those who are charged with prosecuting crime. And that can only be something that will advance the criminal justice system, Madam President. So that the one thing that we can say today is that there are things that we can suggest on this side that can provide that foundation for legislation such as this to be effective and actually bring results. Because we can sit here, like the Honorable Minister has said, and pass legislation, more and more legislation, but the real workings of the legislation is not here. The real workings of the legislation is outside of Parliament. And unless we fix those problems, it is not going to work. So, Madam President, I want to suggest today that another area that the Attorney General can concentrate on is to categorize murders. About 2 weeks ago, when we had that hearing at the Magistrate Court for those 53 matters, the Director of Public Prosecution raised the issue, Madam President, that in this country, the criminal justice system is burdened with over 900 murder indictments. That is not 900 people. That is 900 indictments. Whereas Senator Sturge will tell you, in one indictment, you can have 10 persons charged. So that the level of backlog that you have in the criminal justice system is incomprehensible for the office of the Director of Public Prosecution. And whereas we've heard from the government that they have taken steps to give the Director of Public Prosecution more staff, I think 35 attorneys were assigned. While that is a laudable attempt, Madam President, it falls far short of what is required. And that is something that we have to address. So, when the People's Partnership was in government, they brought the amendment to the Constitution Act, which one of the provisions was the categorization of murder. I think the Attorney General and all of his advisors will tell him that if we categorize murders and you have different degrees, it will clearly provide an incentive for those persons who wish to use legislation like this to come forward and not face the death penalty in certain cases and say, I will plea bargain my way out of it. So I want to suggest that to the government as well. Let us bring legislation to categorize murders. I have a few more suggestions, Madam President, before I get into the provisions of the Act. The Director of Public Prosecution talked about embarking on a process that is more scientific, that will provide proper independent evidence, so that when the prosecution presents its evidence in court, whether it be at the preliminary inquiry stage or at the High Court, the accused will understand the burden that he faces and therefore will be forced to adopt a position that will make use of legislation like this. So, Attorney General, why don't we set up a firearms offenders registry, just like how we have a sexual offenders registry? Why don't we have a dangerous drugs registry? These things will provide the basis upon which we can monitor those persons who go in and out of the system. It is a characteristic feature of our criminal justice system, recidivism. And therefore, if we have these registries set up, you can monitor those persons when they go in and when they come out. Who are their associates? Provide the information to the prosecution so that they will be able to have that information at hand to better prosecute and detect crime. Because I don't think that anybody can dispute, Madam President, It is a small group of people that controls the criminal industry in this country, and we have to wipe them out, whether it be by legislation or prosecution. We have to join together and wipe out this so that our country can get back to the state it was in before. There can be no dispute about that.
This time we will suspend for half an hour and we will resume at 5 p.m. Senator Ramdeen, you've used up 20 minutes of your time.